Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. This, I think, should be an interesting session. We've called it Coping with Success in Major Cities. I'm Martin Brackenbury, your moderator for today, together with Frans van de Avert, who's from CEO Amsterdam Marketing, and Joan Torrella, who's Managing Director of Tourisme Barcelona and also looks after the promotion of Barcelona. Laura Citron, who is CEO for London and Partners, looking after the promotion of tourism for London, and Chris Hayward, who has taken over from Fred, whose father's died, unfortunately, and so he has very kindly come in from New York for this session, and he's Senior Vice President of Global Communications. We're going to have a conversation. We want to start up here and then open it up to you in the audience, and we have just 1 hour. Let me begin by setting the context. Tourism is booming. UNWTO has set out the relentless rise in international arrivals and their forecasts for the future. Domestic tourism numbers are as much as 10 times those international arrivals. 99% of destinations still want more tourists. Ministers are here appointed and measured on their capacity to bring in more tourists. However, there are already some places which have become overfull. These places are having to learn how to cope with success. We have here today leaders from these 4 great cities, and each of these have a global reach, characterized by their openness to discuss just that. But before bringing them in, let me give you some indications of the problems and measures that are being adopted, not just by cities, but elsewhere. Remember, the responsible tourism test is whether measures are taken that make places better to live in and for tourists to visit. In Venice, for example, where some residents resent tourists and tourists complain of overcrowding, the municipality has erected pedestrian gates to limit entry into the historic centre and parking restrictions, so that if you haven't booked your parking spot, you can't cross the bridge into Piazzale Roma. Cruise ship numbers are being redirected and limited. Resentment has been expressed in Palma de Mallorca and Valencia. The resentment is caused mostly by antisocial behaviour, overcrowding, and some forms of home sharing in residential districts. Somewhere quite different, at the Giant Causeway, and I think we have someone here from Northern Ireland. There you are, near in the front row. A magnificent site in Northern Ireland managed by the National Trust and has been suffering from overcrowding, queues and visitor dissatisfaction. They've introduced 2-hour time tickets for coaches and a limit on the numbers entering the site at any one time. My understanding is that visitor satisfaction has soared. The Galapagos limit the number of people visiting the islands at any one time. Thailand have closed a beautiful beach area featured in a film degraded by excessive visitor numbers. The Forbidden City issues 80,000 tickets online every day. Earlier this year, the director of Visit Cornwall, and those of you from elsewhere, it is the beautiful area of the southern western tip of England, said that many small seaside villages reached by narrow lanes were full. The reality is that, worldwide, the same manifestations of overcrowding and interminable waits are encountered to see the places that too many tourists wish to visit at the same time. What is it? What is to be done? What can be done and what can't? What works and what doesn't? At the moment, people arrive haphazardly to visit attractions and waste time waiting to see them. At the Uffizi Museum in Firenze, until recently, the waiting time in summer was up to 4 hours, often in searing heat. Knowledgeable visitors, fearing to visit places, need to be given confidence that, by prior planning on the internet or through travel organizers, that with time tickets they can have a great time in the destination. Destinations need to think through ways of managing the large numbers of tourists, regulating their arrival and flow, seeking to spread them geographically throughout the year, month, day, and hour. So let Let's start the conversation to tease out concerns, next steps and measures with the representative of the great city of Amsterdam. So France. It's a medium-sized city with a global reputation. Can you begin by giving us a few facts and figures, because the context helps to define what are the most effective measures before explaining what concerns have emerged and what you've been working on. So Frans, over to you.
Thank you. I think an ideal city is a kind of a triangle which has a balance between inhabitants, visitors, and business. So when it's a livable, lovable, and prosperous city. And what you have seen in Amsterdam and in other cities, actually, in Europe, is that the balance is sometimes distorted. And this has mainly also to do with the things you just mentioned. Amsterdam has 825,000 inhabitants. We have Amsterdam area has 2.3 million. But we have 18 million visitors every year, of which 50% are Dutch. So you can imagine 18 million visitors, if Dutch or non-Dutch, on a population of plus 800,000 is a kind of a challenge. Also because Amsterdam is growing in a lot of aspects. We're growing with inhabitants, with students, with businesses. So we're growing in all departments. It's a challenge.
Do the people who arrive who are Dutch, do they come just for the day?
The Dutch ones?
Yes.
Yeah, because if you go 2 hours in the train, I'm in London. So everybody goes back in the evening, most of them. Yeah. Because otherwise you're in Germany or in Belgium, so we're not so big. But no, most of the Dutch, they go away in the evening. And of these non-Dutch visitors, international visitors, half of them are first-time visitors.
Right, yes.
Which I see, we will talk later about all kinds of measurements, about spreading people, about regulating, enforcement, all these things. But this gigantic tap stays open with first-time people wanted to see, as I would do, the Anne Frank House, the Van Gogh Museum, the Canal District. Yeah. So no, it's a really challenge, and I think it's a kind of dragon with different heads. Every time you chop one thing off, another head comes up. And
so Frans, what are the main places that people want to visit? I mean, they normally would go on canal boats. Yes. They would visit Anne Frank House, which is pretty tiny, and I think you have time tickets for those.
Yes, sold out.
And also the Van Gogh Museum is another one. Are there others which are equally important?
Well, there are two aspects. First of all, we have, of course, our cultural image, Rembrandt, Van Gogh. We have the canal, we have 5,000 monuments, we have 55 museums. So the arts, a lot of things are art, culture, architectural base, which is great. So a lot of people come for that. But on the other side, we have a long time reputation, which we don't do anything with in Amsterdam Marketing, and that's the red light district and the Ooh La La and the coffee shops, which is another part. We're actually now in a fierce debate about that, because it's a kind of interesting when you're an open, tolerant city that this is also becoming a challenge now. But most of people tend to go to the cultural and architectural aspects of the city.
But actually, I know if I talk to people, say, from Venice, they hate me saying it, but people are coming to the museums and so on, but they're also coming to the historic centre. Yes. And that is like an open-air museum. And in a way, Amsterdam has some of those characteristics.
Yes, but the resemblance with Venice always goes wrong, because the point is Venice was abandoned by Venetians. Yeah. There are no hospitals on that island, there is no education, there is no work. Yeah. So everybody went to Mestre, which is on the mainland, to work there, to get your children to school, and they left their houses behind. Yeah. And then Venice became a kind of open-air museum. And I always say a city without visitors is a boring city, but a city without inhabitants is a dead city, and a city without business people is also a boring city, actually. So you need each other, but I think so everybody's always comparing the Venice situation, but I think when you compare it to Barcelona or Amsterdam or Prague or Bruges or they are living cities. They have schools, universities, hospitals, and it's very important for us and for the city government to keep that social infrastructure alive.
May I ask you a question? Do you promote Amsterdam anymore?
No. We were the first city marketing organization. We are not a tourism destination. We work for inhabitants, for visitors, and for business, kind of what London and Partners does also.
Yeah, sure.
So we do this triangle, and we decided actually in 2014-15, when this is a young problem, this is a really young problem, we decided not to spend any euro in marketing the destination anymore, but just guiding visitors around the city and guide them to high quality things and spread them around the city. So these are our main objectives, what we do for visitor marketing.
Do you do a lot of that guiding in preparation online as well?
Yes, well, this whole, as you see, I don't call it city marketing anymore, I call it city management. It's now, and I think my colleagues will agree, everything is about artificial intelligence, it's machine learning, it's geofencing. So you see these online things, especially with self-learning devices, are getting more and more important, and it's really, really, well, we have 1.5 million followers on our social canals, so on our social channels. So it is, if you have a campaign in spreading people around the city, be it in neighborhoods or our Amsterdam area is as big as in London. Only you have one mayor, we have 32 mayors, which makes a difference. It's not as easy, but it makes the city bigger, and social media, websites are really, really useful then.
By the way, one of the key challenges for open cities like yours is the fact that arrivals are simply outside your control, aren't they?
Yes, and that is the big challenge. Flying is getting traveling is easy. Flying is not so expensive. You can book your own room in I don't know how many seconds. So it's been very much easy. And as you call it in the Maslow pyramid, there are a lot of countries who are now gladly are so prosperous they can travel. They can discover the world. For instance, people from India, they are now on a prosperous level that they can travel the world, which is great. But you see this huge rise in travelers caused by these two things, and it is very, very difficult to say what can we do about it. You can't put a fence on them, because we're all open, tolerant city. You can't say you're not welcome anymore. But the point is what then to do?
It is, I mean, it's a thing to think about, and I'd like each of you to think about this really, is that if you look at the numbers, you've got your numbers coming, which are huge for you, but they could double in the next year or two of 10.
Yes, well, but they won't double, but they will rise. They will rise to 25 million. Yes.
Yeah, so
we know that. We know that. Unless, but you can't you can't shut your airport down. You can make flying much more expensive. But I'm not in the business of organizing that, and I think it's a European and maybe a global thing, and it's also not very social because then a lot of Dutch people can't fly out. So it's a kind of, it's a difficult
Yeah, it is a difficult set of issues. Thank you very much, Frans. Let's now turn to Barcelona. Joan, you've been working on these issues for many years, and you have a very deep knowledge about managing what I would call a tourism city, Barcelona. Can I ask you to, like Frans, to give some facts and figures about Barcelona, going back perhaps to the time before the Olympics? because the change has been dramatic, regeneration of Barcelona and what you are now. And then if you could explain some of the concerns which have emerged and what you're working on.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Mark. I feel comfortable with the title of this conference that talks about major cities, but not big ones.
Yeah.
Because Barcelona, like Amsterdam, is not a big city. And in fact, it's a relatively small city because Barcelona has only 100 square kilometers and has 1.6 million inhabitants. That means 16,000 inhabitants per square kilometers. It's really a dense city, really dense city. Probably our situation, first situation is over residents, not over tourism in some moment in Barcelona. This city is in the middle of the big metropolitan area, really divided in different municipalities. That is an important issue for understand the difficulty to manage the land in the integrated way, because different municipalities have different policies and different strategies in itself. Barcelona is true, is from 1992, was put in the map. We said was put in the map after the Olympics. Barcelona was a city where the hotels closed in August 30 years ago. And after Olympics, the city taking advantage of the boost that Olympics represent for the city, the transformation that the city has, and the city had, improve or try to advantage of this inertia for creating a consortium, private-public consortium, Turisme de Barcelona, between Chamber of Commerce and the City Council, and the action of the promoting Barcelona from then effectively have increase absolutely the number of visitors. I think that during a lot of years in a progressive way, both supply and demand, and until now that the last years we are around the 30 million visitors, half of them sleep in Barcelona, overnight in Barcelona, and the other half, more or less, are day visitors. More than 80% of our tourists are international, are an important issue for Barcelona. Barcelona is not a seasonal destination. It's
pretty level, is it?
Not absolutely plain, but yes, it's probably between November and March is relatively less, but it's all the year full of people, and is we said multi-motivational destination, because Barcelona is not only a tourist destination for business and for leisure and for etc. It's multi-motivational. The visitors in Barcelona are highly satisfied of this experience. Our survey said that the value of Barcelona is more than 9%, the global valuation. And the main issue that is valued by the tourists are architecture and cultural things. But the important thing is that Barcelona is in the middle of the metropolitan area, and the density means that we are working with the province government around Barcelona since 2008. Sorry, we are working on the Barcelona destination concept. We are aware that we are convinced that Barcelona needs to spread over the major land the capacity to attracting people that it has. No? And we need the land around Barcelona, not only because this land needs our visitors, also because Barcelona needs to spread this activity, these visitors over the bigger space. And we are working on with them, with the Diputación in this case, the provincial government, strongly in this concept. Barcelona is much more, we said.
Tell me, I'd like you just to explore and explain a little bit about the arrival. I mean, obviously the most important of them has been Airbnb, which has meant to say people have been spread, but they've been spread into residential districts, where sometimes the result of that is that instead of people staying with other residents, they actually are taking over blocks, which I think, are in a position of having more or less stopped. But it would be interesting to hear what your policy has been relating to that, because that has been part of the spread, which was not governed initially in any way at all, and is now. So can you explain that a little bit?
No, it's true that the disruption of the internet platforms like Airbnb some years ago have signified an important change in general, I think, not only in Barcelona, an important change in the situation. Theoretically, the collaborative economy facilitates this spreading over Barcelona, over the city, but really our experience said that the concentration is the same, that is around the main spots in the city. Barcelona, during some years, 3 or 4 years, before 2015, have increased a lot the offer of vacational rentals, out of control, and the policy in Barcelona have been to limit that with an urban plan, deciding which is the number that every neighborhood can support in the place.
So how do you establish that, for example?
Well,
do you have consultation with the residents about how many?
Of course, also, but the different indicators used was absolutely fundamentally related with the capacity of the number of the vacational rentals in relation with the residential places. The proportion between vacational and housing is important for maintaining the activity that Frans said before, no?
Yeah.
The activity, this balance between the city for visit and the city for live, and is in definitive, paradoxally, that this second thing is that make attractive the city as a tourist destination. The population have been consulted in different ways of participation, and the result was that the city decide how many vacational rentals, not only vacational rentals, also hotels and other accommodation issues, how many places can be in any neighborhood in the city. After that, this is the first stage. After that, the most important, you define the limit, is to defend zone. No? It's how to avoid or how to fulfill the law, the regulation, and this is the second stage, that in strong inspection and enforcement policies, we have tried to maintain this situation, and in fact with good results, because some few years ago, the number estimated of illegal vacational rentals in Barcelona was around 6,000, and now the last check have said 100 illegal vacational rentals in Barcelona.
That's a real success.
It's a real success in our opinion, and we are satisfied of that.
Yeah.
And the third stage, because in a situation like the internet platforms, where the supply and demand is really dynamic and it's really impossible to pursue with inspectors, we need to agree with the main platforms in a commission together with them, the five main platforms in internet and the city council, working together, trying to fulfill this commitment with the law, with the regulation. And even we are trying to use them for as a channel for arrive directly to the visitors, because the visitor, when they want to visit some place, the first step is to go on internet and look for the city, look for Barcelona. In this moment, it's possible already to arrive them through Barcelona if you are agree with the platform who is consulted in this moment. Well, we are working in this way, and it's a long way, because as I said, is a very dynamic and variant situation in the supply.
Are you confronted by the same problems of people arriving in large numbers and you have no control over that. What about, for example, cruise ships? Are they regulated in numbers that are allowed? Because only a certain number can dock at any one time. But you don't actually, in Barcelona, run the port, do you? It's run centrally, I seem to remember.
The cruise ships are something important to talk about because on the one hand, the number of the absolute numbers that people who really visit Barcelona during some hours, there are the transit cruise passengers, are relatively low, less. Okay. 1,200,000, yeah. 1,200,000 visitors, one-day visitors from the cruisers are in the number of global figures in the city are not so important. Yeah. The problem of the circumstances is that the cruise ships arrives more or less at the same time, during the same place, in the same place and during the same hours. Yeah. And the area that is spread on the cruise passengers are relatively slow, relatively little, I'm sorry. The contrary of big, please.
What? Yeah.
Big.
Big.
A small place.
Small place.
And a small place. And the density there is important. The City Council have arrived to an agreement with, have reached an agreement with the port for the next years to limiting the number of docks dedicated to the cruise ships, and this is a limit agreed with between the city and the port in this moment. But the majority of people who arrives to Barcelona in cruise ships is not as day visitor. If the people who start or finish their trip in Barcelona, and that is absolutely different because it's people who have a sleep in Barcelona before or after their trip, or even directly from the airport to the port.
Am I right that you have mechanisms for measuring the number of people that are actually moving in the city, so that you've got to deal with the telecom companies to provide you with effectively heat maps so you can trace the movements of large numbers of people coming up from the cruise ships or from other areas? I don't know whether you also do the same.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
We work together to see where congested areas. This is was actually in advance, before making regulation or enforcement or rules, you have to know where you have to do enforcement and rules, because otherwise you don't know. So this geo information and this technical information is very important.
Very helpful.
But can I say something? The interesting thing with Airbnb, that you always never have to forget that these houses are posted on the platform by inhabitants.
Yeah.
So the discussion is always that there's Airbnb and there's the inhabitants, but the Airbnb
are the same.
Yeah, in the good ones, not in the bad ones.
Right. Thank you very much, Juan. I think we now move on to New York. Chris, can you do the same as Frans and Juan and give a kind of general background about New York? It's a mega city. And I think it's true to say that counterintuitively, mega cities like New York and London, I would say, suffer less than Amsterdam and Barcelona from the effects of excessive numbers of tourists arriving at the same time.
Yeah. Thank you, Martin, for having us here. And again, I send my regards on behalf of Fred, who couldn't be here. But New York is interesting. The population, 8.6 million people, and record tourism, 65.2 million people are expected to visit New York City this year. That's about 51.6 million domestic visitors and about 13.5 million international visitors. And with the overtourism issue, we're not quite at the place that sounds like Amsterdam and Barcelona are at, but we're certainly very acutely aware of the situation. We're monitoring it very, very closely. And we've had strategies in place for many, many years to really redistribute the visitors throughout the city. We have a 5-borough strategy. We try to spread the visitors out to all the different neighborhoods of the destination. And we have a seasonal strategy where we're really trying to get more visitors to come during the first quarter of the year. And many of NYC and Company's vibrancy programs really ladder up to that. If you look at our signature NYC Restaurant Week program, which we run twice a year, NYC Broadway Week, Off-Broadway Week, and a new NYC Must-See Week, which is 2-for-1 attraction entrance. All of those programs are taking place during the first quarter. And actually, we're packaging them this year more smartly to call it the Ultimate Value Week in New York City, to really get people to know that if you come to New York during the first quarter, you're going to get extraordinary value. That's also a time of the year, by the way, that the hotel rates drop significantly. It's about a 30% drop in hotel rates. So that's a really great opportunity to attract visitors, not only for the value of dollar, but the value of experience. Yeah. Because you really do have the city to yourself. The lines at the museums are shorter. It's easier to get restaurant reservations. So it's worked very, very well for us. So we are trying to really put a lot of our energies on the marketing front and communications front into really highlighting and spotlighting the first quarter of the year.
Yeah, so that's time of the year. What about the success, when you're talking about different parts of New York, are you saying places like, suggesting that people would value going to Brooklyn? Where are the other places that you have in mind?
Absolutely,
Queens?
good question. Now, it's a magic question. If anyone can name all 5 boroughs, I'll give them a gold star. But Manhattan, of course, is the place that everybody goes to. Brooklyn has been on the map. They call it the Brooklynization of the world. Brooklyn is the coolest borough of New York City. We also have Queens, which is the city's most multicultural borough. Bronx, one of my favorite boroughs, is one of the greenest places of New York City and home to the city's original Little Italy. And of course, Staten Island, which is sort of a little bit of the lost stepchild of New York City, but we've got the first and only shopping outlet destination opening next spring called Empire Outlets, which are going to bring more people off that ferry and onto the island. So we are looking at economic development opportunities of how can we generate more demand for these areas. You look at a place like Coney Island in Brooklyn and that revitalization of that area and what that has done in terms of bringing more visitors. And Queens has gone through a lot. The Rockaways, I like to tell people, is one of the city's hidden secrets. It's actually our surfing beach. And we've got a new ferry system that can take you, NYC Ferry now, that the mayor recently launched, can take you now from Midtown, or from the financial district rather, over to the Rockaways. So there's new modes of transportation in terms of getting around New York City that we haven't had before. So it's not just the 24-hour subway, but it's now the ferry system. So we do have ways to position the city, and I like to call this the authentic live like a local travel trend. People really want that experiential travel experience, and New York City does answer to that. Now, having said all of that, we are very acutely aware of this over-tourism issue. And we know that Times Square gets jammed many days of the year. But that's also home to Broadway, and it's home to a lot of our biggest hotel members and people, our biggest institutions, so we can't ignore it. But I think the seasonal strategy and the 5-borough strategy, especially for repeat visitors, if you're coming to New York a second or third time, there are opportunities to see a different side of the city, and that's what
you also have quite a lot of hotel development in these outer boroughs, so to speak.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's a really good point, and we're not in a situation where we have a shortage of rooms. In fact, we're home to 118,000 rooms, with another 20,000 on the way by the end of 2021. And so there is plenty of room at the Inn, and about 20 to 30% of that development is taking place in the boroughs beyond Manhattan. In places like Queens, Long Island City and Queens, in downtown Brooklyn, Williamsburg, we just got the new Hoxton Williamsburg that just opened a couple weeks ago. So it is a 5-borough phenomenon. And then you look at Manhattan, it's also not just Midtown, it's areas like Lower Manhattan, which continues to go through a dramatic revitalization. But then other areas like Chelsea, which is seeing a lot of new hotels. So it's really spreading out, and it's giving visitors more options from both the geographic standpoint and experience standpoint, but also from a budget standpoint. So not all hotels in New York have to be so expensive.
What about what I think is quite intriguing, talking to a few New Yorkers recently, is that if you're working there, your patterns of movement are rather different from the patterns of movement of the tourists. And they actually, in many ways, also try and avoid going to the areas where they know, like Times Square, are going to be full.
Right.
You know? So there's a kind of accommodation which seems to work. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, and we also have a new program called See Your City, which encourages New Yorkers to see their own backyard. One of the observations that I've made over the years in New York is, unfortunately, our New Yorkers don't know all there is to see and do in New York City. You talk to New Yorkers about what's coming up, and you talk about different neighborhoods, you know, like the original Little Italy up in the Bronx, Arthur Avenue, which is one of my favorites. You talk to New Yorkers about these places, and oftentimes they don't know. So we have a strategy where we're courting the 8.6 million New Yorkers to spread them out as well and to see other parts of the city. Now, many of them aren't going to Times Square, but maybe they are. If they're going to take their family to a Broadway show and they're going to go do theater and dinner in a theater, they may. But by and large, those are great. Those are a captive audience for us to also create vibrancy by spreading those visitors, spreading those residents out into these other visitor areas. And by doing that, you create a vibrancy that visitors are then attracted to. You also create sort of this ambassador-like mechanism where New Yorkers start to become more familiar with these neighborhoods, and then they in turn tell their friends and family. So there's sort of like this built-in ambassadorship.
Yeah. Very interesting. Now, let's turn to London. Laura, your role is really to promote London. So in a way, it's in a similar situation to Chris. So explain again about the megacity and and the issues that relate to that as you see them.
Thanks, Martin, and welcome everyone to London if you're visiting. So, as you said, London is a megacity, and international tourist numbers to London have continued to rise. Last year, 2017, was a record year for international arrivals, 19.8 million international arrivals, so nearly 20 million. And
is that the largest for any city, or is Bangkok still ahead by a whisker?
I think Bangkok's ahead on arrivals, but you have to check my numbers. Don't quote me on that. And then just over 12 million domestic overnights, but in addition to that, there'll be many million domestic day trips as well. And that's on a population of around 8 million, so comparable with New York population. And from London's point of view, tourism is a hugely beneficial thing to our city. We welcome tourists, not only because of the economic contribution that they make to the city. Last time the study was done, tourism supported about 1 in 7 jobs in London, so it's very significant. But also because it's what makes London what it is. It's that openness and inclusiveness of London that makes it a vibrant place to be. So we very much want to continue to welcome tourists to London, but we're very conscious that we can only grow tourism in London if it is sustainable and if it benefits all Londoners. So we need to be really careful about how we're growing tourism in London so that we don't get into the over-tourism issues which other European cities in particular are facing. So our aim is to grow tourism in the ways that are beneficial to Londoners. And that's about attracting tourists to the city that have the behaviours that are most valuable to the city, that generate good growth. So that's tourists who will enjoy a diverse range of cultural attractions, so they'll go to all kinds of different attractions, galleries, bars, nightlife, live music. People who will come at different times of the year and who'll use the city at different times of day. And also tourists who will spread around the city geographically, just as you were saying. So people who want to live like a local, have these authentic, immersive experiences, get out of perhaps the very congested tourist areas and experience real London life.
Who are they, these tourists?
So they tend to be millennials, so young visitors from longer haul markets who have what we would describe as a culturally curious mindset. So our promotion activity now is exclusively really focused on bringing those kinds of visitors to London, because we know that when they come, they are the most likely to generate good growth for London.
Very interesting. And there are these hotspots, which we were talking about before, which are used by Barcelona and also by Amsterdam. I imagine in New York you do the same. So you can measure, the city in some way measures, and it'll be Transport for London or something would do it here, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
So, because there are times, I mean, I mentioned to you beforehand that I remember fairly recently on a Friday evening arriving at 6:30 at Piccadilly Circus, and as I was coming out, they were closing it, so because you couldn't go down it was just full. And I know that this happens at Oxford Circus, and it happens in Victoria occasionally. So there are already signs of excessive numbers at particular times. And that does cause quite a lot of concern, certainly. I mean, if you, people I know tend to want to avoid, say, Friday evening going into Shaftesbury Avenue and so on, because it's given over to so many people from elsewhere. That's fine, but it's not the time that we would choose. So I think, again, you know, because I'm a resident of London, so I would find ways of avoiding huge numbers at that particular time. Now, look, have you got anything else you'd like to say before we open it to the floor?
I was curious. I have a question for Laura. Is there, you're a Londoner, are there already voices from inhabitants about this challenge or not? Or is everybody happy what you say because it's prosperous, it gets a lot of jobs,
There are some, but I don't think it's of a level yet that we would be concerned that we're reaching over tourism, but we're very, very sensitive to it, and we want to be able to grow tourism with public support, and the way that we can grow tourism with public support is for tourism to be beneficial to Londoners and to mitigate in any way we can the extent to which it's a pain and a hindrance for Londoners.
I suppose the interesting question there is, how do you measure that? You're aware of it, but it's the question of the measurement. It's quite interesting because you've done a lot of work on measuring residents' levels of satisfaction. And generally speaking, there are a few people who make an awful lot of noise, but the general level of satisfaction is much higher than you would expect given the noise. Do you understand what I mean? There are people who are resentful and make a noise, but they don't represent actually the 100% at all. They probably represent a small number. And therefore, what it seems to me very important is to do what Barcelona does, which is to measure the residents' feelings about the development of tourism. Yeah?
We are measuring that from several from several years. We are measuring that from several years, and it's interesting to see the evolution, and even to compare the perception about tourism with perception about all the city. Often, some problems are associated to tourism, when are not necessarily only from tourism. The noise in Barcelona, in a dense city like Barcelona, Mediterranean, when the windows are open the majority of the time during the year, the people is in the street, is noisy. Barcelona is noisy. The Mediterranean is noisy. It's more noisy than Norway or I don't know, Amsterdam, of course.
Way noisy.
I think so.
It is noisy, yeah.
And it's important to know the perception from the population, of course, the perception that say important information for us, like that the people is in this moment thinking that the Barcelona has not more capacity to attract people and need to relax their capacity of attraction because don't fit more people in the city, but also it's important too the opinion from the tourists, the visitors. Yeah. The visitors offers us a lot of information over this experience, not only the positive way that I said before, also that the visitors said also that half of visitors said that the tourist places are, there are too much people, too much visitors. Tourists want not be tourists in the
Sure.
It's complicated, but it's true. And for me, one challenge really important for me, and for me, Frans said before that Amsterdam don't spend any more money in promotion, is probably the problem of tourism is that this tourist-centrism, that means that we need to work with tourists without talking about that. Barcelona, any city, is the capacity of attract value, attract talent, attract people, attract business, attract investment, is that really important. Visitors add to that, and we need to attract all this value, and the visitors also. It's for this way that I think, and we are working now, and starting now, working in the, trying to context the tourist promotion in the city marketing, not tourist marketing, but the city marketing, because tourist is an issue more than Barcelona needed to attract. And I think that the experience of Amsterdam in the last years is interesting for this way, because finally you talk about visitors, inhabitants, a business.
Yeah, but also because I'm here for business, that's why I'm here, but I hope to go in the afternoon to the National Gallery to see an exhibition.
Yeah.
So, and that's purely for fun and pleasure.
Yeah.
And hope to go tonight to a play. So then I suddenly become a different kind of visitor. So I don't like the word tourists. I always prefer to talk about visitors, because there are many sort of first time, second time, business, leisure, everything.
And we change the role when we are in the city.
Change your role, so it's very difficult to point at people. And another thing is in this whole discussion, which has always been mixed, you have the problem of too many people in a space, for instance, Times Square, Piccadilly, and you have antisocial behavior. And these are two different things.
Completely different.
But they tend to get mixed the whole time. Also in Amsterdam, in the press, but these antisocial behavior, they are the loudest people, so everybody connects the reputation of tourism with these kind of people, which is totally wrong. That's how it works.
Yes. Right. Any more observations at this stage?
One other tip I wanted to mention is we actually have a program at NYC Company called Turisme Ready, which actually works. Turisme Ready. Yeah. Where we work with those smaller businesses in the boroughs beyond Manhattan and in Manhattan to help educate them about how to be more involved in the tourism industry. So I think as you develop that strategy of like spreading visitors out to a city, you have to bring the businesses along the ride with you. And so we are now giving them resources on the back end on how to work with the travel trade, how to get into and make their businesses literally tourism ready. So it's been a very successful program we started a few years ago, and we continue to do it. And there's basically these classes that we do for the small businesses. And this is a way to sort of cultivate the tourism, the trend of spreading these visitors out and supporting a neighborhood strategy. So it's just an important observation.
I mean, as a resident of London, I'm absolutely clear that if we didn't have the 19 million tourists, we would not have remotely the same extraordinarily rich offer that we have. You talked about going to the National Gallery, but then going to a play or a concert or whatever. It's absolutely extraordinary, the level of offer. The only thing I'm now finding is that I live in a sort of a west part of London, an area called Chiswick in West London. And that was a kind of anonymous place which nobody knew much about. And now we have visitors arriving, particularly at weekends, and it feels quite different. And of course, partly as a result, there are a lot more restaurants. When I first arrived, there was one restaurant, and now I don't know how many, there are hundreds, you know. So it's being transformed.
You see everywhere.
So it's quite interesting. That's the spread. I don't know whether you had Chiswick in mind, but anyway, it's extraordinary how it happened. Well, anyway, I don't want it to go too far, you know. Anyway, so this is the balance. Now, everybody, you've been listening to this. I hope you find it intriguing. Now, we have got 10 minutes left, and we have got Harold here, who's got a microphone, and we've got arms going up. Can you introduce yourselves and make certain that you have the microphone before you speak? Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Benjamin Carey. I'm based in Edinburgh. Edinburgh at the moment is doing consultation on a tourism tax. It's either going to be £2 a night or 2% per night. Do you think some kind of visitor payback scheme is a useful thing for cities that are facing over-tourism, or do you think it's just a complete distraction?
We just raised it to 8% next year.
Say that again? You've just raised it.
Well, it's going to be raised 8%, yeah, for your hotel room.
8% of what?
Of every hotel room.
Every hotel room?
Yes. And it gives, I don't know, 100, 200 million, growing. And the city says it's for investment in cleaning the streets and things like that.
And it's interesting, I mean, I know you don't, we talked about Venice briefly. There they introduced the tax on people coming in coaches, €2.50 or something, some years ago. And they were using it because these were people coming for the day, and they didn't actually have, because the amount of money that is raised from residents was going down. They were 170,000, and then they were only 50,000 or something. And they didn't have the money to pay for all the waste and so on that the day visitors bring. You acting in the same way, in a sense, to do that? Is that the way the money goes?
I think what Laura said, it has to be beneficial for all the inhabitants, because in the end, the city is, I strongly believe that the city is owned by the people who live there, because the visitors go away. So that is, I think, very important, and I think these measures, I don't know if they will work. That is the problem. The problem is what will work. For instance, the Airbnb regulations, we now will go, in Amsterdam, we'll go back now to a maximum of 30 days a year. There's enforcement, there's a registration. The point is, when I have an Airbnb in Amsterdam, and Laura is my guest, but I received, and when she likes my house, I like her as a guest, but I'm at the maximum of my number of nights, I will give her my visitor card, so just call me directly. So that's a difficult thing. So you have all these measurements, and the point is which will help. I do think that making the city quieter in public space is really important. So really think about who is allowed where. I strongly am opposed against segways, tuk-tuks, all these, which I call Disney World traffic, because that is not typical for a city. So you really have to invest in your public space and do a lot of regulations.
What were you going to say? Yes.
Yes, because the problem, tourist is a part of city and city is a part of tourism. It's impossible to separate the tax in tourism only. Obviously, to be in an accommodation place, in an hotel or in a tourist apartment, is possible to identify as a fact that is possible to tax. But other things like to work for Barcelona is impossible to pay for that.
No,
but
indeed.
it's possible to put tax not for being tourist, but for using city. For example, the coaches can pay for a car park in the middle of the city, being tourist or not, or the cycles or the subways, this kind of thing for going. It's possible to pay not as a tourist, probably as a company who rents this kind of people to the tourist. And the tourist tax is a tax in the middle of the context where the funding of tourism, or the funding of management of tourism in the city needs to be paid from the visitors. And we need to identify different moments and circumstances that make possible to take money for that, not only in the using room.
I think what is quite intriguing about that is it's funding for the management of tourism in the city.
Can we just take two questions together?
Yeah.
Hello, my name's Sarah Johnston. I'm a journalist, but I'm here more out of personal interest. I was interested in something that was alluded to, but hasn't been directly addressed, which is anti-tourism movements. There's definitely been one in Barcelona, and I think there's been some rumblings in Amsterdam.
Sure.
What sort of challenge do they present for city marketing organizations? Surely you have to consult with them, etc. And many of them talk about the environmental effect of tourism. What does that therefore mean for you?
Sorry, can we just gather these two questions?
Okay, got some more questions, yes. Remember to say who you are.
Yes, my name is Christian, I come from Italy, and I would like to, I live close to the Cinque Terre, and it's a place that is sure is affected by overtourism, and also I see that it's very difficult by tourist operator to understand where try to direct their activities, like they try to lose their identity in a way. So it's like becoming a second kind of Venice. I would like to understand what could be an intervention in that to prevent this. Thank you.
Yes. Now, are there any other questions, or do we just take those two? One last question, yeah?
I can't remember more.
I've not understood the second one.
My name is Inga Roos, from Iceland, based in Copenhagen.
Yeah.
As most of you know, I mean, Iceland has seen a tremendous boom in tourism, a country of 330,000 people with around now 7 million visitors this year. I would say our largest struggle has been the infrastructure part, that we have an island and a ring road and restaurants and hotels made to accommodate a population of 330,000 and a few German bird watchers throughout the years and some hikers from England and the US. And now we have a single ring road that is supposed to accommodate 7 million people, etc., etc. And therewith comes the struggle, who is responsible for the funding, the financing, and so on. And I'd like to hear your experience of these struggles in terms of infrastructure, not just the, not just how the residents respond to this boom, but how do you go about these things? You mentioned the tourist tax, which also has been up for negotiation in Iceland back and forth. You say it's supposed to be spent on cleaning up the city, things like that. Is that your experience, in fact, that it is being used on
That's what they say.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think when you introduce something like that, you should tag it. You should say, okay, we're going to get this money and we're going to spend it for this and this and this. This is not used in the financial structure of Amsterdam, but to make it comprehensible and valuable for inhabitants, you could say, okay, the money is spent there. But if I made, well, the politics, we had city elections, council elections in March, and it was there were two big topics. One topic is, I think, a topic for every big city in Europe is about living and housing. You have enough houses for students, for starters, for social, all these. It's not because of the visitors, but it's a part of cities getting bigger and bigger, and then division is getting bigger, and that's a really, I think, a challenge all the cities like us have to cope with. But the other subject was this portfolio, this balance thing, and we really had to work very hard as an organization. First of all, that we were not the organization who caused everything, because the thing which has caused everything is Amsterdam as a city, and we opened 6 museums and whatever. Right? So you have to do a lot of talking to politicians and tell them how they can use your communication channels to achieve their goals, especially on sustainability.
Well, yes, Laura, yes.
Just going to come in on the infrastructure point. So in London, the transport infrastructure, we're very lucky in that we have an integrated transport authority in Transport for London, which is very much investing in capacity, and we have a new east-west train line, the Elizabeth line, opening next year, which we think will carry about 200 million trips a year, so a big expansion of capacity. But at a more local level, if you look at things like street signage and street furniture and what's happening at the local level, the business improvement districts are really critical. I know New York also has business improvement districts, which is when around a specific local area, all of the relevant businesses choose to pay a levy to a central organization, which then invests in the local infrastructure, which is a lot around tourism, but not exclusively. It's also to support residents and local commerce. But they're very important in London at a local level, and much of the city is covered by business improvement districts.
Juan, I think I'm right that in the recent election of Senora Colau, that tourism and the issue of tourism was a very important part of the platform for her election. Am I right or not about this?
You are right in the sense that the tourism is in the middle of the citizen debate in Barcelona from some years ago. And the perception of the tourism as a problem for the city have played an important role in the last years in this debate in the city, also during the elections and during the electoral campaign. But I think that is extraordinarily wealthy for us, because the debate, this kind of debate in the city, means that in a democratic society, not everybody thinks the same, and it's absolutely legitimate to identify which kind of model do you want and which kind of model do you prefer in the system that the city has for attracting people. It's different that to the anti-tourism movements, or it's different that the vandalism. That often somebody have talked about this question as a tourist phobia or something like this. Barcelona, the majority of people, more than around 80% of citizens, think that the tourism is an important thing for the city. The valuation is different than thinking that it's not possible to. Okay.
Yellow card. Why?
Okay, is that?
You get a red card.
Right. Well, I think we have done pretty well. It's now only 5 minutes past the hour. Harold has said we must draw it to a close. I hope you've enjoyed hearing from these 4 different leaders from 4 different great cities with a global reach. So if you can thank them for their contribution, I'd be most grateful. Thank you. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.